Hello, this is a recording primarily for the Suffolk Jungian Circle for our July discussion. But as with all of these, if anybody else is interested in the topic, wants to make a comment, give some feedback, please feel free to do so. And if you're listening and you would like to join in the online discussion on the evening of the last Wednesday in July, drop me a line and I'll send you the Teams link for that. So the theme for July is to talk about life scripts. This is an idea primarily advanced by Eric Berne, who was a Canadian-born psychologist who eventually moved to America and became very, very influenced by Freud. And certainly a lot of his ideas in transactional analysis you can see as direct borrowings from Freud that have been adjusted a little bit. But he also blends in ideas from Jung. I'll mention a few bits and bobs from transactional analysis as we go along so we can discuss them in the online meeting. But mainly I want to focus on talking about life scripts rather than all of transactional analysis, because the life scripts are the more Jungian part of his theory. But the shortish version of kind of what transactional analysis is, in order to put it into some kind of context, is that Berne started studying psychoanalysis and came to the conclusion that it was not all that it could be, that it was open to adjustment. And one of the adjustments he wanted to make was to keep the focus on behavioural interactions in the here and now, and the notion that transactions, engagements between 2, 3, 4, however many people, how they treat each other, how they respond to each other, how they engage with one another, provide some significant insight. So it's not the kind of more traditional Freudian thing of a one-to-one between the analyst and the analysand lying on a couch talking about their childhood memories and all that kind of thing. It's more about observing how somebody engages in day-to-day social interactions now to give you an insight into their state of mind. And just as Freud has a tripartite mind of the id, the ego, and the superego, so Eric Berne comes up with this idea that there are three primary states: the adult state, the parent state, and the child state, which are kind of not so much like separate organs in the body or anything like that. They're more behavioural patterns that people slip into, like kind of ruts, I suppose you could say. And you need all three. The adult state is the more desirable one for adults, at any rate, to be in that if you're in parent state, you have a tendency to take on board responsibility for other people. You treat them as if they were children, even if they're not. Sometimes it is done with the intent of being helpful and kind and assisting other people. Other times it's done to condescend and control other people, and it can very easily slip into that kind of condescending thing that, for example, a lot of people with disabilities talk about encountering this sort of conversational gambit, I suppose you'd call it, where a well-meaning person comes along and says, not to the person with disabilities themselves, but to a friend, a relative, a carer, does he take sugar? So rather than talking to them directly, they're talking to somebody else. That's the kind of parent state of treating somebody as if they're a small, vulnerable child who can't understand things themselves, and so they have to be looked after. And of course, there will be times when somebody, for whatever reason, can't understand things themselves or can't cope and does need looking after. So it's not automatically a bad thing, but when it is taken out of context and used excessively as a behavioural ploy, as a state of mind to be in, then it becomes problematic. The child state is to adapt either childlike in the positive or childish in the negative states of behaviour. Kind of regression, essentially, what Freud describes as regression. So to take a position where you expect other people to take responsibility for you, for your decisions, for your mistakes, rather than taking responsibility yourself. You're always is kind of looking to somebody else to do things for you, pick up your socks, do your ironing, do your washing, cook your meals, take a motherly or indeed a fatherly role in looking after you, and it's entering into a childlike state, which again is not automatically a bad thing. Being in touch with your inner child, being able to kind of have fun, to play, to engage, to have a laugh in life, not always being terribly po-faced, terribly straight-laced, terribly serious is a good thing, but in context, in measured manner, too much of it, especially in the wrong kind of a context, becomes a retreat from life and a passing of the buck onto other people to do all the things you really ought to be doing yourself. The adult state is to treat other people as equals. So you're on a one-to-one with them, you're engaging with them as equal to equal. You take care of yourself, they take care of their self, and it's quite a sensible state of mind to be in, and it might sound as if it is the preferable one, and generally speaking, most of the time for adults it is quite the preferable state of mind to be in. But, as Berne himself says, if you tried to exist continuously in adult state, never entering any of the other states, then you'd be terribly dull and terribly uptight and very joyless and almost robotic. And very kind of a difficult person to deal with in many respects, because you would be permanently in that state. A little bit of it, fine, good. Too much of it becomes problematic. So in the healthy mind, you're capable of moving between different states as circumstance and necessity requires it, rather than being trapped forever in one particular state of mind. So that's the kind of general context for how Berne is thinking and developing a lot of his ideas, not all of them by any stretch, but a lot of his ideas. And as I say, he's quite interested in this kind of interaction, transaction between people, which is why it's transactional analysis, of course. How do people transact with each other when they're communicating and negotiating and so forth? And he's quite keen on this idea that we often use behavioural ploys to get what we want. And direct communication is sometimes a bit of a rarity. People manipulate, they trick, they deceive, they whinge, they whine, they do all sorts of things, rather than just plainly saying, this is what I want, are you prepared to give it to me? Yes or no? Boom, boom, boom. Straightforward. So that fascinates him quite a lot. But, getting to the Jungian part, one of the things he argues is that there are what he calls life scripts, and in his early writings he draws very heavily, very Jungian fashion, on Greek mythology to illustrate these. Now, in some of his later works, and I'm guessing perhaps he had some input from a publisher who said this is all a bit terribly highbrow and it's putting people off of buying it, you've got to bring it down a bit to make it more accessible. So he goes away from using the Greek mythology metaphors to using much more kind of basic language and basic understandings of the same concepts. But because I'm a Greek myth snob, I'm going to stick with the Greek stuff. And what he's, aside from liking the Greek myth, but what he is arguing is that these life scripts are encapsulated ideas and concepts that kind of come as a package, that we all, as very small children, absorb ideas from mum and dad and granny and uncle and big brothers and sisters and whoever else is around us about what the world is like and what we are like as individuals. And those two things go rather hand in glove. So your understanding of yourself directly interrelates to your understanding of the big wide world, which is other people, but it's also more abstract concepts like God or fate or society. So not just specific individuals, but kind of the broad picture. Is the world a good place or a bad place? Is it a friendly place or a frightening place? All of those sorts of ideas coalesce. And again, a kind of a midway point between Freud and Jung, in that he's arguing these conceptualized visions or scripts are things that we absorb when we're too young to be really critical and to kind of pick them apart and see the flaws. We're just small children, we don't know any different. We just pick up what we're told, and they become unconscious. They become almost like a kind of form of programming. So as we get older, we start to act out the scripts, just as an actor given a copy of Hamlet or Othello or Measure for Measure or whatever will act out the script. Well, as small children, we get cast into a role by the dominant adults around us, but the older we get, the more we are the ones doing the casting. So you can't keep blaming mum and dad for everything. You've got to take responsibility and say, well, I'm 30, 40, 50, 60 now. I am the one who is still putting myself in these positions. Yes, maybe it started when I was 2 years old and didn't know what the hell was going on, but I'm the one doing it now, sustaining it, maintaining it now. And so part of move towards therapy is the acknowledgement of personal responsibility. Rather than constantly blaming people from when you were a small child, is to say, I've been doing the casting myself and the script writing myself for 30, 40, 50 years. It's my choice, my decision. I now want to stop writing an unhappy script, because there are a set of scripts, and I suppose you could say mainly because he is a therapist, or was a therapist, by the nature of the job you tend to interact with unhappy people. Generally speaking, people who are blissfully happy in life don't go and see a counsellor, they don't go and see a therapist. So in that job you tend to more see the miserable and the unhappy, and therefore the scripts that those people have, by the very nature of them being there in therapy in the first place, are dysfunctional scripts. His view was that the genuinely happy don't really have scripts at all. So it's not like there's bad scripts and good scripts. It's more a case there is bad scripts and no scripts. Because people who've gone off script, who are originating their life in the moment, living in the moment, all a bit zen, they're not adhering to some fixed dictated script that was implanted in their brain when they were 2 years old. They are taking charge of themselves in the here and the now. Now, it doesn't mean they will make every single decision perfectly and dazzlingly brilliantly and their life will be ecstatic. They'll still balls things up, they'll still make mistakes and get things wrong. That's the nature of being human. But they are not hidebound by some constantly repeated cycle. And it is constantly repeated in the same way, if any of you like soap operas, I don't, they bore me. But it's a common complaint that many soap operas, if you follow them for a few years, you see exactly the same plots, exactly the same patterns, again and again and again. They just change the actors. So here's yet another affair, here's yet another domestic violence story, here's yet another murder story. It's same old scripts going on and on and on, round and round and round, as if they've run out of anything original to put in the show, so they just keep repeating stuff that they've done before and before and before. All they do is change the names of the actors, well, names of the characters, and change the actors cast in those parts, but the plot goes round and round and round. And that's kind of what he's saying about people stuck in these negative scripts, is they keep doing the same bloody thing again and again and again. They keep getting into the same kind of relationships. So if they've got a miserable love life, miserable marriage or whatever, they get divorced, they marry somebody else who's just as awful as the first person they were married to, and they get out of that relationship and they go into a relationship with a third person who again is just as awful as the first two. So they're not breaking the pattern because they're not even realising there is a pattern. They're just programmed in much the same way as a robot doesn't really understand its own programming, it's just following it, doesn't have consciousness. And this is half the problem, that people have somewhat limited consciousness in that they are doing things they're not aware of doing. They're at an unconscious level. And much like Jung's argument around individuation, the aim for Eric Berne is to try and get people to be more conscious, more individuated, to put it in Jungian terms, that they become aware of the patterns and then stop doing them and make significant changes. So what I thought we'd do is go through the 6 main scripts that he talks about. He's not necessarily saying there are only 6 ever. There can never be a 7th or an 8th or a 9th, and certainly other people have suggested additional scripts, but he's saying these are the 6 common ones he has encountered. Now that could be, bearing in mind that his professional career was almost entirely spent either in Canada or in America. He didn't go and do therapy in Nairobi or China or Bangladesh or somewhere like that. So had he gone to a very different culture, maybe he would have encountered very different scripts. I don't know. That's just speculation. So even though this is framed in Greek myth, are these scripts peculiarly common to North America? Or would you just as easily find them in any other part of the world? I personally would suspect the latter, but I've not done any research, and I'm not aware anybody else is running around doing a load of research to put that one to the test. So it could be that there are strong cultural elements, and if you grow up in one culture you have one set of scripts, and if you grow up in a totally different culture you have a different set of scripts. I don't know. It's a talking point for the discussion group. And there's a little bit of artwork, because I thought this lends itself to the visual. Thought about doing a PowerPoint, and then I decided to not. Get fed up doing PowerPoints at work, so I printed it off on bits of paper, low res stuff. So we'll start over here with the Sword of Damocles. So I'll just take you through a brief synopsis of each myth and the kind of element of it that relates to what he's talking about. So the tale goes that Damocles was a phenomenally wealthy king in ancient Greece, who, like any other extremely wealthy king, lived a life of absolute luxury and was pampered and waited on and fed and watered and all the rest of it. But as a result of a curse, and we won't go into the ins and outs of it because it's not directly relevant to transaction analysis, but a sword, if you saw that in the picture up there, there's the sword, is forever hanging over his head. And those old Bugs Bunny cartoons and things where a rain cloud forms directly over a character's head, and no matter where they run, the rain cloud goes after them. It's pretty much the same with Damocles. If he gets up and walks out of the palace, the sword still floats above him and follows him around, so he can't get away from it. And he is told that one day the sword will fall and straight through him, obviously kill it, but he doesn't know when. And so he's got this fabulous life of luxury and kingship and power and all the rest of it, can do as he damn well pleases. But there is always this nagging voice saying, look up, look up, look up, you're going to be dead any second. You don't know if you might be killed in the middle of a feast, if you might be killed when you're in bed, if you might be killed this, that, the other. So it's his joy is marred by fear. Now it's a very clear metaphor for death, that every single one of us has the sword of Damocles hovering over us, in the sense that some point we're going to die. Today, tomorrow, 10 years time, 20 years time, whenever, we're going to die. So no matter how much fun you're having right now, this minute, you've got absolutely no guarantee that you'll still be alive in 5 minutes time, let alone 5 years time. You could have a seizure or something and keel over dead a few minutes later. So that sword, the Damoclean sword, is the threat of death, which every single one of us has to deal with and to come to terms with. Do you, as the king does, live your life in constant fear of death? Or do you just do what most of us have to do and shrug your shoulders and think, oh, fuck it, and go on with life, and make the most of it whilst it's here? And you still go through the motions of hoping you're going to be alive in however many years' time. So you pay into a pension plan, you think, oh, I'll save up to go on holiday to so-and-so place next month, next year, whenever. You're hoping you'll be alive, And the nature of life is that, well, we could live perpetually in the minute and never, ever, ever think about tomorrow. But you know, we'd have probably starved to death. Well, if our ancestors did it, they would never have saved up grain for the winter. They'd have eaten it all right now, and you know, we wouldn't be here because our ancestors would all have died out. So we manage very, very well, most of us at any rate, with the threat of death by not thinking about it, by just getting on and assuming we'll probably be still alive and live long enough to make the most of the pension plan we've paid into. Not everyone does, of course. Some people pay into it and drop dead before they ever get a chance to draw a penny out of it. But we live in the hope of the future. So when he kind of, well, simplifies it, let's go for that word. When Eric Berne simplifies it and tries to step back a bit on the Greek myth, he talks about this as the after script. So people are enjoying the moment, they're doing the nice thing now, but a big piece of their mind is perpetually thinking, after this, what? I'm having this wonderful glass of wine, but I bet I'll have a horrible hangover after. So the after doesn't have necessarily a direct relationship to death. They're not quite like Damocles in the myth, in that they're not constantly thinking, ooh, I'm eating a nice sandwich right now, but I'll bet I'll be dead in 5 minutes. They're rather thinking, whatever joy I have now, something negative, not necessarily death, but something negative will happen after. There'll be a price to pay for my happiness. And again, as small children, mum, dad, whoever else around them, have imparted this idea that whatever joy you have in life, there is always a downside. There is always a negative, unpleasant consequence. Whether it's the hangover from drinking or, I know, embarrassing of infections from sleeping around or whatever it might be, there is some kind of knock-on consequence, a downside. So it always haunts the moment of joy. You're never fully happy because you're always wondering what the on-cost is going to be, what the downside, the miserable side, the nastiest, when will that unpleasant thing drop on my head as a punishment for being happy now. So they never really enjoy life. They're always fearful of tomorrow. Obviously that is not a healthy state of mind to be in, where you can never really be fully engaged, fully present, fully joyful, because part of you is convinced there's always going to be some shit happening in 5 minutes' time that's going to ruin the moment of happiness you've got right now. So whether you're happy in your job, happy in your love life, happy in your artistic endeavours, part of you is forever thinking it's all going to go wrong, and you're waiting for the horrible consequence. That needs to change, Eric Berne says. Okay, next script. This is Hercules, or in the Greek myth, Heracles. And well, there's lots of stories about Heracles, but the one that Eric Berne is particularly thinking about is the 12 labours of Heracles. That, well, again, lightning quick version. Heracles is tricked with kind of poisoned, drugged, sent mad, and caused to murder his wife and children in this state of frenzied madness, which is outside of his control. When it wears off and he sees what he's done, he's horrified, as anybody would be, and repents and calls to the gods to wash his hands, metaphorically speaking, of the murder of the blood of his own kin, his own family. Because from a Greek point of view, the worst type of murder is the murder of your own family. It's bad enough murdering a complete stranger, but to go and murder somebody you're related to is the pits. And it must be atoned, otherwise Nemesis comes seeking revenge, and the Erinyes, which are these sort of frightening goddess-like forces that come in to avenge wrongdoing, particularly against family members. And this is where Heracles gets sent off on his 12 labours. He's got to go and do these 12 impossible things in order to be forgiven and to wipe clean the guilt, the blood, the damnation, and start his life afresh and help to lay the ghosts of his wife and his dead children to rest, because they cannot rest whilst he is in a state of, well, we I suppose these days would call it sin, using the Judeo-Christian idea, hamasha from a Greek perspective. So he's got to, he wants to be happy, he wants to put right, in as much as you can, what he has done wrong, but he cannot do it until he has completed these ridiculously impossible tasks. Just as the Damocles script in the simplified version is called the after script, so the Heracles script in the simplified version is called the until script. So this is the idea that someone wants to be happy, they want nice things in life, and there's things they probably feel guilty about, they feel bad about, not necessarily murdering wives and children, which is a bit extreme, obviously. There's probably something a bit more modest than that, but stuff they feel terribly bad about, terribly guilty about, and maybe all a bit Freudian, kind of family guilt that's been heaped on them from a very, very young age. So there's that sense of having to atone, having to put things right. But they don't believe they can be forgiven, that they can put things right, that they can just have a nice life and get on with it, until they have completed some set of tasks. Now there was a follow-up of Eric Berne, another psychologist who was inspired by him, studied his ideas and went with it, called Finita English, who the term she used was hot potato. And she says that this, and this would kind of fit the hot potato example, that usually children, not always, but usually children, very young age, are handed these issues, these hot potatoes, by their families. There's all sorts of hot potatoes. She outlines some of them really bad, some of them moderate, not so bad. Some might even look quite good at first glance, at any rate. Burdens that have to be fulfilled. Those burdens could be, well, all sorts of, so I'll give you a couple of random examples. Finita English talks about vengeance. You come from a family that has this story, a narrative, a script, that says at some point in the past awful things were done to us by so-and-so person over there, and we must avenge ourselves on so-and-so person. And it is the duty of each member of the family to bring about vengeance. And if one of them fails, the next one must, and the next one must, and the next one must. So that kind of mafia gang war type thing. You've got to go and kill so-and-so person to avenge the blood. Or those old Scottish clan feuds that went on for hundreds of years, where we'll kill one of yours and then you kill one of ours and then we kill one of yours, and on and on it goes. So feuding and revenge is a common hot potato. Also another one, not quite as melodramatic as that, that English talks about, is the idea of the kind of deferred hope. So a very obvious example is something like the pushy stage mother, or stage father for that matter. So the parent who was never famous, but really wanted to be famous, who then has a kid, and they manipulate and nag and pressurise that kid into achieving the fame that they never got. So they've been thwarted, and you have to live out my deferred dreams for me. You have to become a famous actor or a famous singer or a famous footballer or a famous whatever it is, because I never did. Kind of regardless of whether the kid wants to be that thing or enjoys that activity, they've got to live out the parents' dreams for them. So it might be fun to start with. Your kid might enjoy a bit of football or titting around on stage, but the level of pressure gets more and more and more and more, and the child knows if they ever falter and don't do so well, they are letting mum down, they're letting dad down, and the disappointment and the guilt, on and on it goes. So that is another example. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of other examples of this hot potato idea. And the labours of Hercules, the burdens, are in that kind of a context. And when I say impossible, obviously in Greek myth they really are quite mental. The things he has to go and do, beating up a giant lion and all this kind of blah. But in human terms, it's a lot more modest than that. But tasks that are presented to the child that are really difficult to do, often worded in such a way that it's nigh on impossible to, you kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't sort of thing. It's kind of a bit like Lang's notion of the double bind, where the child really hasn't got a hope in hell of achieving the things that are expected of them because of the nature of what it is that is expected. And it could be all sorts of things, again, whether it's to do with vengeance or thwarted talent or some other thing, but they've got to achieve this, and it's usually not just one thing they've got to achieve. With the Herculean script, it's a whole set of things. So even if by some miracle they achieve one of the labours that's put before them, they're straight into the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and they can never be happy until they have done them all. And so it's just this endless bloody succession of things that they've got to achieve. So it isn't, not enough that they get an education, they've got to have a PhD. It's not enough that they get a job, they've got to be the CEO of the company. It's not enough that they win a football match, they've got to captain the winning team at Wembley. Is ridiculous stuff, that they've got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And mainly it's the parents that are putting these burdens on the kid, but it could potentially be other sources that are transferring the burdens onto the child, including kind of more abstract social forces, notions that come from a sense of religious community or national community, national identity, that you've got to do this, do that, do the other. You can't just be yourself. You can't just live a nice, pleasant, ordinary life. You've got to jump through ridiculous hoops in order to even be allowed the space to think about having a nice life. So that's the negative script there. But of course, even with the pushy stage mother-father thing, even if they died, the voice in the head is still there, nagging. So there's never really an escape from it until you break the script. Okay, so the one there at the base, that is Tantalus, who, how well easily you can see that picture, but he is kneeling in a pool of water, and he's reaching his arms up to grab at some grapes dangling from grapevines. Now, in Greek myth, he was a very naughty king. I think most kings in Greek myth are quite naughty. And he was damned to the Greek version of hell for his naughtiness. And one of his many, many sins was that he was very inhospitable to people. So he's kind of damned to suffer the consequences of that. So he is in a pool of either water or wine, depending on the translation of the story, and desperately thirsty. And every time he puts his head down to slurp up some of the water or some of the wine, it all drains away. And so he can see it, but he can never reach it. And he's incredibly hungry. But every time he reaches up for one of these lovely succulent looking bunches of grapes, the branches go up into the air and he can't reach them. That's his torment for the rest of eternity, is that he can see the things he wants, but he's never allowed to get them. They're dangled in front of him, and that, of course, is where we get the word tantalizing from. To dangle something in front of a person, but prevent them from having it. Which is worse than them never seeing it in the first place. he is tormented by being tantalised forevermore, and so this kind of script is somebody who's got quite clear ideas on what they believe will make them truly happy. They've been told, oh, you need money, or you need a romance, or you need to have 6 kids, or you need this, or you need that, in order to be truly happy. So that they know what it is that they want. The grapes, the wine, whatever that they require. They know what it is, or they think they do. Whether it would really make them happy, I suppose that's a bit of a moot point. But they genuinely believe it would make them happy. Their life can never be content unless they have it. And they see the thing they want around them. Other people have it. Other people have the good jobs, or the good education, or the happy marriages, or the this, or the that, or the other. It's always dangling in front of them, just there. But whenever they reach out to get it, it's pulled away from them. Now, Berne's argument is it's not that there are karmic forces or the gods or some mysterious power pulling the things away from them. Rather, he says, it's that they themselves behave unconsciously in such a way that pushes the thing they want out of their reach. So they see some glamorous woman or handsome man that they fancy at a nightclub or wherever it is, and they think, oh, if only I could get with them, I'd be so happy. And they go up to them and they reach out to that person. You're dancing. And proposition that person, but they're unaware, because it's unconscious, that their body language, their tone of voice, the words that come out of their mouth, the expression on their face is all wrong. So the beautiful woman or the handsome man sees this person coming, behaving in this really weird fashion, and they think, well, fuck off. And they run away. So it's not that a mysterious power plucks that person away, rather it's that the individual themselves is undermining their own efforts. But they don't know that they're undermining it, because it's their own unconscious mind that has been programmed by this script to do the very things that screw up the situation, screw up their chances, prevent them from getting the very thing that they want. So they are forever tormented and tantalised by being that close to getting what they want, and stood next to other people who have the very thing that they want, and they're full of jealousy if they're lucky, or envy, which is much more caustic if they're not, and eaten up by not being able to have that thing. Like a very hungry person stood outside a restaurant with their nose pressed up against the window pane, looking in at all these people stuffing their faces. And they've got no money, so they can't afford to buy the food they're so desperately hungry for. And it feels to that person as if their entire life will be like that. And I wonder to what extent, perhaps, maybe a little bit controversial, don't really want to upset people because they're pretty upset enough as it is, but with a lot of the talk about the incel movement of, well, mainly men, some women, but mainly men, who desperately want a date but can't get one because either they are ugly as sin, or at least they think they're as ugly as sin, and no one wants to touch them with a barge pole. So they kind of see all these handsome guys with loads of girlfriends, or beautiful women with loads of boyfriends, or whatever the gender combination happens to be for them, and everyone else is getting it. Everyone else is shagging like rabbits, but they can never get someone. And they come up with all sorts of rationalisations and reasons why women don't like them, or men don't like them, or whatever. It's this, it's that, it's the other. Stuff they cannot control, stuff they can do nothing about in their own minds. And they feel as if they've had a miserable, shitty 6 months, and the rest of their life, even if they live to be 90, will be just as miserable and shitty and frustrated. So that they see no light at the end of the tunnel, no hope, no sense of resolution, of getting somewhere, of improving their life. That's a terrible mental burden to live with, and there's all sorts of studies done on rates of depression and self-harm and what have you, amongst people who declare themselves members of the incel community, because in their minds life is just awful for them and never will be anything other than awful for them. And that's why in the simplified version of Eric Berne this is called the never script. They will never be happy. So Hercules is sitting there saying, well, I'll be happy after I've done these ridiculous things. And Damocles is saying, well, I'm quite happy now, but it's all going to go tits up in 5 minutes. So I can't really enjoy the happiness I got now, because that sword is going to go through the top of my head any second now. Whereas poor old Tantalus is saying, my life is shit today, and it'll be shit tomorrow, and shit next week, and shit next decade. And it's always feeling just awful. And so they kind of make, I suppose over the passage of time, less and less effort to try and reach out, to try and make it better, because they get to the point where they don't even bother trying to drink the wine or eat the grapes, because all of the previous times they've tried it, it's gone wrong. And so they just eventually sink into apathy and stop trying. And it's not to say that they are correct, because half the point of Eric Berne is that these scripts are conditioning. They are not reflections of reality, they are reflections of internal mental conditioning. So that unattractive looking bloke who can't get a date could, Eric Berne might say, go down the gym, sort himself out, get a haircut, have a shower, do this, do that, could improve his chances dramatically, and people do. There are people who spend long periods of time in the incel community and then manage to get a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it is that they're looking for, and do change that pattern. So it does work for some people, but the kind of point here is that the reason they cannot get the thing they want, whether it's a job or a girlfriend or whatever, is not because of some irreversible reality. It is because of what's up there in their mind, and how that influences their behaviour and their attitudes and their body language and their interactions, back to that social interaction, how they engage with other people. It puts other people off, whether that's putting a girlfriend off, or putting a job interviewer off, or they're desperate for an education and they behave like a complete tit in the classroom and it drives the teacher mad. But they undermine the very thing that they desperately want, because deep down they have been conditioned to believe they don't deserve it. They must want it. I mean, if they didn't want it in the first place, it wouldn't be an issue. But they've been conditioned that they must want it, that their entire happiness and contentment and meaning and worth and value in life is conditional on having that thing. But at the same time, they've been conditioned to believe they don't deserve it. They'll never get it, they'll never have it. Tough luck. And coming back to this intergenerational thing about this so often coming from parents, is that this is probably indicative of either the mother's life or the father's life, or both of them together. One thing Berne doesn't go into immense detail on is what happens when you get one message from mum and a different message from dad, and a third message from granny and whoever else, and the child is exposed to conflicting messages. He doesn't go into too much detail on that, which is a bit of a gap that needs filling. But put that to one side. Once the script is installed, they end up, that person, often repeating very similar lives to the parent who has given them that script, and they're probably repeating from one of their parents and one of their parents, back to the year dot, of how these familial narratives transmit down the generations, which is quite a bleak thought, isn't it? The endless generations within a family, all of them bloody miserable, because no one has ever broken the chain. So that's a factor to think about as well. So moving on, different page. Okay, so this here, the lady, is Arachne. And Arachne, in Greek myth, was a very, very talented weaver. In the picture, she's sitting at a loom weaving a bit of cloth. But naively, never do this, naively she brags that she is better at weaving than the goddess Athena. And if there's one thing the gods and goddesses do not like, it's hubris. Humans so massively arrogant that they believe themselves to be better than the gods. And as soon as they hear that, the gods turn up and slap you into regretting your actions quite quickly. So Athena turns up and says, right, you think you're so bleeding good at weaving? You will weave for the rest of eternity, and turns her into a spider. It's not quite clear if she's the first spider ever, or she's just a spider. But anyway, as a spider, obviously, she's an immortal spider, so she has to spend a million years doing nothing but weaving. As a life script, this is an interesting one. If you're good at something, you can be trapped by it. So it's a life script I can understand. What was her name? Dorothy Parker, the American satirist, advised men that if they wanted to date a beautiful woman, they should tell her she was clever, and if they wanted to date a clever woman, they should tell her she was beautiful. Because if you're clever, you get a bit fed up being told you're clever again and again and again and again and again. And if you're beautiful, you get a bit fed up being constantly told by people how beautiful you are. It loses its cachet and its value by constant repetition. It's like eating your favourite meal every single day, forever. I mean, you might really like it the first few times, but after a while you're going to get bored to bleeding tears of it. It just becomes too much. And so the person with the Arachne script is trapped in doing the same thing again and again and again and again. And it may be a thing that they're really talented at, they're really good at, and maybe when they started they really enjoyed doing it, but they're getting sick to bloody death of it. Like Arthur Conan Doyle writing Sherlock Holmes stories, or Agatha Christie writing Hercule Poirot stories. At first it was fun and it was enjoyable, but the constant demand for more and more and more and more of the same means that person never gets to do anything different, never gets to have any variety, never gets to try anything outside the box. They spend their whole life in the box that they're good at until they're sick to death of doing it. And they're desperate to do something else, something different, something new, but they never seem to get the opportunity. And part of the problem here, Berne argues, is that seam is a very self-inflicted seam. And it may be that other people do say, oh, we really enjoyed your Sherlock Holmes stories, Mr. Conan Doyle, can you please write us another one? But what's to stop you turning around and saying, well, no, I'm having a holiday from writing Sherlock Holmes stories. My next 3 books are going to be about something totally different. So whatever it is that you do that you're good at, you can shake it up a bit. You can give yourself variety. You can try doing other things. Of course, you may not be as good at them, and you may not get the same level of praise and positive feedback for doing them. And that, for Berne, is kind of an underlying issue here. Because as much as the person moans about, oh God, I've been called clever so often, I've been called beautiful so often, I'm so bored of it, there's a part of them that dreads not being praised, not being valued. And they sneakily suspect if they tried doing something different from the good thing they're good at, then, well, they wouldn't be as good at the new thing, would they? Nobody ever is. So they wouldn't get the praise. Would people stop noticing them, stop wanting them, stop valuing them, if they didn't do the thing that's in such high demand? So you might get bored to death being told you're beautiful, but if one day it all goes a bit saggy and wrinkly, and there's only so much Botox you can afford before people stop praising your beauty. Do you then become acutely conscious that nobody really pays a blind bit of attention to you anymore? Because whatever else is that you end up doing instead of, or traits you exhibit instead of, the thing that's got you all the praise for all those years, maybe you don't do anything else quite as well, or have any other qualities that are quite so pronounced. So the other stuff is just kind of leaving you forgotten about in a shadowy corner. And it's not very nice to be ignored. Kind of like Oscar Wilde's bit. The only thing worse than being spoken about is not being spoken about at all. To be invisible is no fun. To be the wallflower that is overlooked and forgotten about, and you could be dead on the floor for 6 months and nobody even notices. That's not good. From an evolutionary point of view, being forgettable is not a great evolutionary strategy, because the tribe doesn't look after forgettable people as well as it looks after memorable people. So there is an evolutionary impulse not to be invisible, an evolutionary impulse to be noticed just enough that people remember you and take care of you and include you. So there is a fear in the Arachne life script person that if they stop doing the thing, whatever the thing is, they will become invisible. And that's why they keep doing the thing. As much as they moan and bitch and snipe about it, bore to tears of it, they fear the alternative. And it's their fear of the alternative that prevents them from having a crack at doing other stuff, getting better at doing other stuff, maybe being praised for doing other stuff. In time, take a while, obviously, but in time. So that they are, in effect, they are as much to blame for trapping themselves in that situation as all of these other demanding people coming along to them saying, please do this, please do this, please do this, are to blame. And in the simplified version, Eric Berne calls it the always script, because you're always doing the same bleeding thing day in, day out, without relent. Gets a bit much. Back to the pictures. This is going to be a long one, isn't it? This is Sisyphus pushing a bleeding great big boulder up a mountain. So again, naughty King Sisyphus gets sent to Tartarus, the place of punishment, the hellish realm. And he's told, see that big hill up there, that kind of pyramid-shaped hill, very, very pointy hill, and see that sodding great big boulder? You've got to roll the boulder up the hill and balance it right on the pinnacle of the hill, and when you've done that, you'll be free. You can go home. We'll let you go out of this hellish realm. But, of course, as soon as he's broken his back getting the boulder to the very pinnacle, it rolls down the other side. And he's got to do it again and again and again and again and again and again. So he spends the rest of eternity going up and down this bleeding hill trying to get the boulder on top, and it will never stay on top. It just goes to the next side. So when Eric Berne is looking at this as a life script, he is saying that there are people who have been convinced as children, programmed as children, and continue to think it as adults, that they can be happy, they can be free of burdens and miseries and dooms and glooms and this and that and the other, once they have achieved a particular task. And that task could be any of 3 dozen different things. But they never quite complete it. Why do they never quite complete it? Well, some of it may be to do with the nature of the task itself, but quite a lot of it, Berne argues, is because they are undermining themselves. To ensure they never finish the impossible task, there's always one more bit to do. And so they never get to the glorious day when the doors of hell open and they're told, you're free, go and do whatever you want, because part of them in the back of their head has no bloody idea what they want to do. And as another Eric Fromm, another psychologist, said in one of his books, people are terrified of freedom. They demand it, they beg for it, they crave it, but give people freedom and they don't know what the hell to do with it half the time. You give people a shorter working week, they've got more free time. What do they do with their free time? Well, some people will find things to do with it, admittedly, but quite a lot of people have no idea what to do on their days off. So they go and do something mindlessly boring that they don't enjoy doing, shopping or ironing or something equally tedious, and sit there wishing they were back at work again. Because they haven't got, or it's been knocked out of them, let's put it like that, the joyful imagination to think of positive things to do instead. And you need to have that capacity in order to enjoy freedom. You need to be able to think of what you actually want to do with your freedom in order to enjoy having a freedom. So freedom is not about getting away from negative stuff. Oh, I don't have to do this, I don't have to do that, I don't have to do the other. Rather, it's about moving positively forward to engage in the thing you do want to do instead. You are free to do that. Too many people, Eric Berne says, are focused so heavily on what they don't want to do anymore that they have no capacity left to think of what they do want to do instead, and that's dangerous. That's Sisyphus, or at least Eric Berne's reading of Sisyphus, someone at the back of whose mind is the fear that if they stop doing this ridiculous task, they'll have nothing. And as much as they hate the task, it's less frightening than nothing. As a possible example, thinking of a few literary figures I've come across in stories, someone who is, I don't know, does this happen these days? Probably. But it used to be in kind of Victorian Edwardian fiction, a common feature of these usually a woman, the spinster relative of the family, who would look after the doddery old parent until all the other brothers and sisters have gone off and got married, and there's the spinster one still at home looking after some crotchety aging parent. And then eventually the parent dies, and before that relative, the carer, has got a chance to draw breath, there's some other bloody relative, an aunt, a grandparent, a third cousin twice removed, some other old fart who's demanding their attention and saying, come and look after me. And so that spinster relative just goes from being a carer for one person to another person to another person to another person. Their whole existence spent fetching and carrying and drudging and being run ragged by some demanding, cantankerous, ungrateful old so-and-so. Craving freedom, dreaming about freedom, thinking, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I never had to fetch and carry, if my time was my own. But perhaps underlying it all, a genuine fear that if all of these relatives had killed over dead and there was no one to eat up their time, eat up their life with demands, what would they do? Sit there twiddling their thumbs and staring at the wallpaper? Obviously they're capable of finding other things to do, but the point is often people's imagination, their creativity, their spark, their joy in life has been so extinguished, they get to the point where they can no longer dream up what they would do instead. If they weren't drudging, what would they do instead? Used to be, possibly still is, a very high death rate amongst men within the first 2 years of retirement. That they'd spent 40 plus years of their life in a job, it stopped. They had no idea what the hell to do with their life anymore, so they just sat there and died because they couldn't think of what else to do instead, which is a horrible, depressing thought. But again, it's that kind of Sisyphus thing. I finally got this job to the pinnacle and it stopped, and I don't have to push the job anymore. I can now go and do what exactly? and then they end up going back and pushing well, either they die or they go back to pushing the rock up the hill because they're no longer able to think, or at least, well, with help perhaps they could think, but it's a real challenge to think of what else to do instead that will be better, more joyful, more rewarding, more satisfying. The final one, nearly there, if your ears are bleeding. So the final one down here with the two trees is Philemon and Baucis. Nice story for a change. Philemon and Baucis are an elderly couple, old married couple, and Zeus comes to them in disguise asking for help, and they give him help. And he rewards them by going and turning them into two trees, and the trees grow together and their branches are knotted together and they're sort of wrapped around each other for the rest of eternity. And it's meant to be a very beautiful image of this sort of sweet old couple who just go on growing with each other forevermore. But to Eric Berne, it's a story of absolute bloody boredom. No change, no growth, no challenge. It's just an eternity of doing the same thing again and again. So not dissimilar to Arachne, an eternity of the same thing, but an eternity of mild level contentment. In a sense, it's peaking too early, although it's a story about an elderly couple. It's not uncommon in younger people who have their great achievements very young in life, and then there's not much else to challenge them after that. They can kind of live off the money of their great achievements and sit on their laurels, and no one's likely to give them much earache about it. But I suppose it's like being on permanent holiday. The first few weeks, couple of months will be absolutely lovely, but after a while, would you get fed up with it? One of my students, well, graduates now, told me a story about a friend of his. I can't remember the friend's name, but the friend had gone off and got a job in Tahiti, and for the first year or so, I suppose, was phoning and sending postcards and what have you, saying it's glorious, it's wonderful, it's perfect, it's beautiful. Every day I go and sit on the beach and look at this palm tree and look at that. And look at it. Absolutely bloody lovely. And I'm sure most people would think living in Tahiti must be like living in heaven. But the guy has been in Tahiti for a few years and is bored to bloody death with it. Because this wonderful environment is the same wonderful environment every single day. And again, going back to what I said with Arachne, it'd be like eating your favourite meal every single day, 3 times a day. It's nice to start with, but after a while, familiarity breeds tedium, breeds stagnation. There's no challenge, there's no excitement, there's nothing to overcome, nothing to get your brain working, nothing to engage your emotions. It's just coasting constantly, forever. And whilst it might sound nice, Eric Berne is arguing a lifetime of coasting is a wasted lifetime. It's a stagnant lifetime. It's a boring lifetime that goes nowhere and does nothing and achieves nothing. The simplified version, he calls this the open script because it's kind of open-ended. It's not going anywhere. You got nothing to engage you mentally, emotionally. You just kind of like a bit of driftwood or a jellyfish in the ocean wave being washed about on the current, going nowhere in particular. And you're facing an eternity of boredom. And again, it's because you kind of lack the imagination, I suppose, or you were not conditioned to have the imagination to dream up challenges for yourself. Maybe this is why you get billionaires who decide they want to go and live on Mars or build hot air balloons that will take them up to the very limits of space and all these mad things. Is that as much as the sanctimonious say, oh, well, don't you donate your billions to curing world hunger? If you've never experienced suffering and misery yourself, then trying to solve other people's suffering and misery is perhaps not the most engaging thing to do. It's terribly worthy, but all a bit boring, and they don't want to be bored. They've had enough boredom. They want to come up with something that's going to challenge them personally. They're not that interested in making everyone else happy, because when you're that rich, you don't have to. You can afford to ignore people when you're that rich. What they're looking for is something that will emotionally engage them as an individual, and so they come up with all these mad schemes. That's I don't know. That's me guessing. I've never met a billionaire, so I don't know. It's the searching for engagement, for interaction, for emotional commitment in the face of not needing it. There's an Agatha Christie story, a couple of them actually, similar characters in both stories, where well, in both cases it's female characters, but they're hugely rich, crazy rich people who are just bored. Everything is easy for them. They click their fingers and the servants come running and they do everything. And the wealthy characters just sit on their bums. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to worry about anything. They don't have to stress about paying the rent or anything like that, the way most 99% of people do. They just coast. And the sheer boredom of coasting leads them into all sorts of dangerous situations in Agatha, because it's Agatha Christie, so obviously there's dangerous situations. But whether it does so in real life, or you get somebody who maybe hits the bottle or becomes a drug addict just to I know, relieve the sheer boredom of it, of a life without challenge. So that's the final script. So the idea is that if you move off script, well, first off, you have to recognise that there is a script, and you say to yourself, "This is my script," and you look at these various six, and it's that one. This is what I keep doing in life. This is why I keep repeating the same stupid mistakes again and again and again. You become conscious of it. So it's that kind of Freudian, Jungian thing about bringing to consciousness, bringing to light, as being the first step towards change. You've got to acknowledge it's there in the first place. When you have acknowledged it's there, then you are in a position to start rewriting your script. There's somebody at the door, so I'm going to leave it there for a discussion, and we can come back to it later. Okay, thank you.